But nonetheless, we will break the program into a couple of segments today. The first segment, we have a guest on the telephone line. His name is Cal Thomas. He is the nationally syndicated columnist with the Los Angeles Times, a guest host on CNN's Crossfire, a regular contributor to National Public Radio's All Things Considered. Cal, very good afternoon to you.
Well, thank you, Bob. Nice
or good morning, I suppose.
By voice.
Good morning, I suppose, in your neck of the woods.
Well, I'm up here in Washington. It's kind of a funny thing. I tell people I had to go 3,000 miles to find somebody to syndicate my stuff. But I work out of Washington, and the LA Times Syndicate syndicates my stuff to a number of papers, including the Tampa Tribune.
Don't you do things for the Christian Broadcasting Network as well?
No.
Did you ever?
Well, I contributed some commentary for a short period during their late and apparently not lamented evening newscast. They asked me to come in and do some commentaries for them, and I did that for a few months. Then the show died.
Okay, I could have sworn that I saw you doing what appeared to me to be a regular segment on CBN, but apparently I'm mistaken on that.
Well, I feel sorry for the person who looks like me.
Cal, as per usual, you have a recent book out. By the way, the book is called Occupied Territory, a compilation of various different columns over the last couple of years, and needless to say, provocative. Along with the book, of course, comes a little PR sheet, and there's a quote in there that just really, really boggles my mind. May I?
Sure.
Although America is not currently embroiled in a conflict that could mean the physical loss of its own soil, she is instead in the heat of an ideological battle. Too many people who should know better are allowing the liberal press to intimidate them. The press tells them what to think and how to think. They refuse to consider that often what they are reading does not square with biblical truth, or in many cases with sound reasoning. Cal, my goodness, that sounds hypocritical to me. What press did you have in mind as telling people how to think?
Hypocritical how, Bob?
Hypocritical how? Well, I don't know of any newspaper that says we have the truth, and if you don't believe it, you're going to rot in hell.
Well, I didn't say that.
I know you didn't.
Well,
but that's the implication. Nonetheless, that's the implication when you talk about biblical truth.
Well, I think that what we've gotten away from in this country is a standard for truth that Alan Bloom beautifully summarizes in his best-selling book, The Closing of the American Mind. We have come to a position in our country where everything is relative, that there are no standards anymore. We see this in the debates, for example, in the question of AIDS. People are afraid to say, look, the best way to make sure you don't get AIDS is not to indulge in the behavior that brings it about.
Well, I suppose one might also counter the best way to ensure that you don't have murderers and thieves and rapists is not to engage in the behavior that brings it about, i.e. having children.
Well, I think that's going a little too far. I think that the best way, you'll never have, as long as you have sinful men and women, a society that is totally free of sin, which includes murder and rape and these other things. But you should have in a culture a respect for the law, a concept of absolutes, a sense of what is right and wrong. But what we have got to in this country now is a situation where the worst thing you can be is what is referred to as intolerant, by which the left means telling people that certain modes of behavior are wrong and incorrect according to, and I would say again, a biblical standard. The principles of the Bible work whether one believes in its author or its source or not.
You just mentioned moral absolutes, a favorite phrase of the new Christian right wing in this country. Might you give me an example of a moral absolute?
Yeah, thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery.
Thou shalt not kill.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, how about if somebody's trying to kill me, Cal?
Well, Ted Koppel gave an absolutely magnificent speech to the Duke University commencement last spring to graduating seniors there, and it was a marvelous critique of the current culture based on the Ten Commandments. Now, Ted is not an evangelical or a fundamentalist Christian. I believe his background is Jewish. But among other things, he said that what you young people, what the culture needs to be told is that you should not engage in the kind of behavior that produces AIDS, not because you might get a social disease, not because you could die, but because it's wrong. He said the entire history of the culture of humanity has been judged by a standard based on the Ten Commandments. And I thought this was an amazing admission for one who does not come out of this, as you put it, new Christian right.
Well, I'd be delighted to discuss Mr. Koppel's speech with you, although I'm very disappointed that you didn't continue along the line of giving me examples of moral absolutes.
Well, I'll be happy to give the line of moral absolutes if you like. Thou shalt not commit murder. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not bear false witness, rob, steal, kill.
Mm-hmm.
These are founded...
You wouldn't steal, Cal, if you found yourself destitute and your family starving? You wouldn't steal?
Well, the scriptures say that those who are in a right relationship with God have never gone hungry. One who
well, I know that's what the scriptures say, Cal. But the fact of the matter is, people have gone hungry who are very religious.
Oh, really?
Really.
So, and where has that been?
All over the place, Cal.
But you
this
can't
country.
Give me a specific.
Can you give me a specific of people who have not gone hungry, who were right with God? You were the one that made the assertion. I beg your pardon. You were the one that did. You just flat out said, scripturally, people that are right with God won't go hungry.
What I'm saying is that the scriptures promise, and I have never known God to go back on his promises, that one who knows God and loves God will never want for anything that he needs.
You've never known God to go back on his promise?
Never have.
What about that little passage in the Bible that says where two or more of you gather together in prayer and, ask on earth it will be done? Mm-hmm. Want to pray with me, Cal, for the elimination of cancer this afternoon?
Are you a Christian?
What do you mean, am I a Christian?
Just what I said. What, in order for one...
Well, would you like me to get a card-carrying Christian on the phone, and the two of you could pray for the elimination of cancer this afternoon?
I thought we were going... Are we in a debate? I usually get paid for debates, Bob. Are you a... Joe Pine, or are we going to discuss my book and some of the contemporary issues like the summit?
I thought we were discussing your book and some of the things that you said in it and some of the things that came along in the PR sheet. And besides, you were the one that just said that nothing has ever, God has never gone back on any of his promises.
That's true.
And if you want to sit on my show and make, assertions, then I'm going to challenge them.
Well, fine.
If that's too much trouble for you, Cal, we can go on with something else.
Well, in order to understand the French language, which I took in college, one must first take the class. And in order to understand biblical truth and principle, one must first be a believer. The natural man does not understand the things of the Spirit. And to tell someone who is not a believer about the promises of God would be like trying to quote from a press conference by the President of France for one who has not taken the French language.
Well, that's, a really fine tap-dancing answer, Cal. I was, born and raised in a Christian home, born and raised into a Christian church, went through Christian schools, et cetera, et cetera.
But have you been born again, Bob? That's the question. I was born in a garage. That doesn't make me a car. That's the question, you see. Have you received Christ as your personal Savior, which gives you a...
Well, frankly, Cal, it's none of your business.
Well, you brought it up.
But, no, I haven't.
Well, that's
one of the reasons I haven't, Cal, is because of men like yourself who make these wild, broad, sweeping assertions and then, when put into a corner, just, kind of tap dance away from it.
Well,
it kind of told me that the whole thing was hypocritical.
The scriptures also say that you shouldn't cast your pearls before swine, Bob, and so people who don't understand it, again, it's going back to the French language analogy. You can't understand.
Well, why don't you just call me a pig?
No, I didn't call you a pig. I'm simply quoting the scripture.
I see.
Now, let's move along. What else do we got to discuss?
Well, Cal, your book, gee whiz, so many interesting things in it. Gosh, the first column that is reproduced here in the book going back to July 18th, 1985, would justify or excuse shameful behavior today, hiding behind the First Amendment. So because we stand for nothing, we fall for anything, and then immediately you launch into some diatribe about Madonna appearing nude and that she should be ashamed of that. Are you ashamed of yourself, Cal?
I very often am, Bob.
Are you ashamed of your body?
Beg your pardon?
Are you ashamed of your body?
No, not really. I've been working out for the past couple of years, and I've got that in pretty good shape now, I'm happy to say.
Great. So what's your problem with somebody else who isn't ashamed of their body?
Well, you have to put the whole column in context, and the question had to do with shame and the fact that we don't seem to be ashamed of anything anymore. We seek to justify every human behavior, and as I believe I either said in that column, it's tough to remember them all. I
appreciate that.
But if I didn't say it in that one, I've said it in another one. It used to be that in America, those who held to a standard higher than their own glands, a standard of truth, and preached against sin and the consequences of sinful behavior were elevated pretty much in the eyes of the culture. Now the people who are the sinners are elevated, and those who preach against the sin are denigrated. And the worst thing you can be is intolerant, which simply means that you tell someone else that what they're doing is wrong. So that's what I meant by shame. No one seems to be ashamed of anything anymore, whether it's Ivan Boesky and insider trading on Wall Street, or people who lie on the government, or a number of the other things, or even TV religion, for example. You may have noticed that Jim Baker has recently gotten reordained by some outfit out in the Midwest and has never come to a public confession of what he has done. So there's virtually no shame anywhere anymore.
Well, I might share some of your views on abscam and insider trading and so forth and so on, but I fail to see an analogy between that and Madonna.
The point was, I used her, as many columnists do. You use a contemporary incident, and when I wrote that column, it was in the headlines about her appearance in one of the magazines, that she was not ashamed of anything, and I used that to jump off to an indictment of the culture, which lacks shame for anything, whether it be in government, Wall Street, politics, or whatever. Another example that came later was the Gary Hart situation, of course. He said, I made a big mistake, but not a bad mistake, and Geraldine Ferraro got on Nightline and said, well, we need to get through this very quickly because Gary's really great on women's issues. Well, since when did adultery not become a woman's issue?
Well, I think adultery is, again, not really anything that the president has anything to do with one way or the other. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, well, several have, including John Kennedy, Warren
including
Harding.
Ronald Reagan.
Well, I don't think that accusation has ever been brought on him. Warren Harding, who was president at the time.
It has never been brought on him. I beg your pardon, it has.
While he's been president?
No, not while he has been president, no.
Yeah.
But clearly he and Nancy, fooled around a little bit before getting married.
Yeah, that's right. Apparently Pat Robertson did too, huh?
Yes. But again, coming back to this particular column where you're trying to tie abscam in with Madonna, and also, I might point out, John Jenneret and his wife making love on the Capitol steps.
Yeah.
I fail to see how being a thief and a liar, which is indeed something to be shameful of, is in any way connected with, making love with your wife.
Well,
apparently nobody saw it.
If you can't see the difference between an act that ought to be private in the judgment of most and doing it on the Capitol steps, then...
Well, apparently it was private. There were no complaints about it. Apparently nobody saw it.
Well, I think the point I was trying to make, Bob, was on the shame factor, and I don't know how I can explain it to you any better than what I have in the column and what I've just attempted to do in my humble way.
I'd like to move on to Ronald Reagan, if I might, with you, although first I must take a break. My guest is Cal Dow. Ronald Reagan, a bitter disappointment to you?
I wouldn't say bitter. I think that he has changed the direction of the nation when even liberals in Congress now are talking about closing the deficit and cutting back on things, as Tip O'Neill was up until the moment he left as House Speaker. I think that he's made a significant contribution. He's a disappointment, I think, recently, in my judgment, in the sense that he did not take a more activist approach to the whole Iran-Contra affair. I don't feel that any apology was necessary for that. I think the Congress tied his hands. I think the recent revelations by a high defector from the Nicaraguan government, which is headlines in the paper today on the New York Times and the Washington papers, outlining the Sandinista and Soviet and Cuban plan to undermine all of Central America, gives additional credence to those who have never wanted to trust the communists in the first place.
How do you know for sure what the Nicaraguan plan is in Central America?
Well, we captured a lot. I say we. The American forces captured a lot of their documents in the Grenada invasion a few years ago. In their speeches, Ortega's brother, Daniel Ortega's brother, has been even more vociferous than the dictator himself in his...
Considerably, since the dictator himself toned down what his brother had to say.
Yeah, well, he let the cat out of the bag, That's he has been to Moscow several times. It's no secret that the Soviets have been and wish to pour more aid into Nicaragua. The United States aid to the Contras has been only a measly $100 million or so, and the Soviet aid has been over $2 billion. The Nicaraguans have the largest standing army anywhere in Central America.
Of course, and they're a dirt poor nation, hardly able to keep that army up, and the thoughts of tripling that army are just utterly ludicrous, aren't they?
Well, they may be ludicrous on their own, just as it might have been ludicrous for Castro to stand on his own economy, but of course the Soviets and the East Germans and the Czechoslovaks and the Poles and the PLO and a number of other movements around the world are helping to underwrite that endeavor and doing a pretty decent job of it.
Well, would you go along with thinking that Ronald Reagan is now becoming a useful idiot for Soviet propaganda?
Well, I'm afraid that I think that's probably a little too extreme, but I might say that Howard Phillips, who brought that line back to public attention, Howard of the Conservative Caucus here in Washington, was not saying that on his own. He was simply quoting Lenin. Lenin's point being that there would be those in the West who would trust what the Marxist-Leninists wanted to do enough so that they could be useful idiots in the achievement of Soviet propaganda. I think that the president is a little starry-eyed in some of this, shaking Gorbachev's hand, hearing him talk about God and spirituality a little bit, and believing that he simply is different. He's different, all right, but only his approach is different, not his substance.
Ronald Reagan, I suppose by this point in the game you've caught on, just really used the new Christian right wing to get power.
Oh, well, I don't think there's any question about that. I've written a number of columns on the danger of too close of a marriage between church and state in this regard. Politicians tend to regard the religious community, be they Jews, Catholic, Protestant, or whatever, as just another special interest groups, like a group like labor unions, like blacks, Hispanics, or whatever. And I think that the church risks being corrupted, as we have seen all too well in recent months, by too close an association with power. I think the history of the church has been that it functions best when it's able to speak truth to power, and it got too much into Ronald Reagan's back pocket, into the Republican Party's back pocket, and I believe lost its effectiveness, much as the liberal church did for many years, of course, in the 60s and 70s. They turned to government as a first resource instead of a last resort, and as a result, they too became just another special interest group for the left.
Well, I suppose my real point was that he was just blowing smoke the whole time. He was never really on your side, was he?
Well, I don't know about my side, but no, I think that he shared a lot
editorial you.
I think he shared a lot of the principles. I do believe that he does share a lot of the principles. I think he is a pragmatist, which is not necessarily a dirty word. You try to get done what you can get done. But I think that he's played a very questionable game in this regard. But then so some of the conservatives, some of the right-wing pastors.
Did he ever offer any legislation that would have put school prayer back in? Did he ever offer any legislation that would have abolished abortion? Did he ever offer any legislation doing any of the things he really promised to do?
Well, there were a number of legislative initiatives in this area, but none of and of course the Supreme Court justices have been probably the ultimate contribution. Where Judge Kennedy's going to stand on this, no one knows. I'm sure the Judiciary Committee, which began hearings this morning here in Washington, is going to try to find out. I think he could have pressed harder.
Disappointed with him?
No, I'm not disappointed with him, considering the alternative, Walter Mondale.
I appreciate it's a little bit early in the game, and I appreciate your public position, but are there any of the Republican candidates that you tend to favor a little bit more than others at this point?
Well, I'm in kind of a difficult position in the sense that two of them have been close personal friends of mine for a good number of years. George Bush I've known for 16 years when I used to work for an NBC affiliate in Houston, and he was my congressman there. Jack Kemp and his wife Joanne and children have been longtime personal friends. We attend the same church in Washington and have for a number of years, and I admire both men very much. I think in terms of vision and strength and ideas and exuberance and all of the rest, my personal preference is Jack Kemp, but it appears that as of right now, his campaign is going nowhere, and unless George Bush makes a major mistake or a scandal of some type surfaces, which has not, and I don't expect that it will with George, it appears that it's his nomination to lose.
You really trust George Bush as a conservative?
Not really, frankly. I think that...
Would it help you to distrust him if I told you that I voted for him in the 1980 Pennsylvania Republican primary?
No, not at all. I mean, I've voted for him, as I recall, once for Congress in Texas. He's a good man. He's not my ideal candidate, but I don't think we've got any real bell ringers on either side. I think a lot of the people who want to run, for example, on the Democratic side, Cuomo and Nunn and Chuck Robb and some others are not for their own reasons. And frankly, I'll tell you, it's a landmine, series of landmines out there. Anybody who's got anything in their closet at all that they've ever done has to decide whether they want all of this aired in public. If I were ever going to run for president, the first thing I'd do is put out a press release on every known sin I'd ever committed.
One notable omission in your list there that I would have thought maybe would have found some soft spot in your heart. Pat Robertson?
Well, Pat is a good man. My feelings about Pat have nothing to do with his positions, most, if not all of which, I agree with. My concern is the experience. I'm just concerned that we consider turning over the most important and powerful office in the world to a political novice, and I feel this way, whether I agreed or disagreed with anybody. I think that you need some kind of public schooling as governor, as a senator, as a member of the House, in government, regardless of your positions. One of the things that bothered me about the Christian Yellow Pages, you may remember, of a few years ago, I don't know if they're still around, I'm really glad that the auto mechanic thinks he's going to heaven, but I'm more interested in whether he can fix my car.
Cal Thomas, my guest. Again, Cal, I must put you on hold for a short break here. We'll check in with the WFLA newsroom and continue with the conversation with Cal Thomas. And Cal Thomas, my guest. Cal, is it necessary to, let's see, how can I delicately phrase this? Is it necessary to
don't be delicate,
spread innuendo, misinformation, half-truths, and getting your cause out?
Are you speaking of me?
Yes, you.
Oh, well, I don't think they're innuendos. I come right out and say what I feel. That's one of the reasons 73 newspapers now take me. I don't, and I would disagree that they were half-truths. I try to tell the truth as I see it. I respect the views and values of those who disagree with me. As a matter of fact, I read more columns of those who take a different view of my own, sometimes picking up some information I hadn't thought of, than I do people who agree with me.
I quite agree with that position. Well, let me refer you back to April 27th, 1986, again in your book, column entitled No More Boogeymen. Again, one very brief paragraph, if I may. By the way, the O'Hare resignation, this is talking about Madalyn Mary O'Hare and the fact that she had recently resigned from, well, actually retired, I guess is a better word, from her organization. By the way, the O'Hare resignation deals the most serious of blows to fundraisers who have had a field day for a generation raising money for various causes by using the specter of Madalyn Mary O'Hare's, taking religion off the airwaves, or removing In God We Trust for our money, or denying Congress the right to hire chaplains to say prayers before meetings of the House and Senate. Didn't bother to point out that those things aren't true. Madalyn Mary O'Hare, in particular, has done nothing to try to remove religious broadcasting, has she?
No, that's true.
The adrenaline is pumping. The blood is flowing. So let me take a couple of minutes to tell you why, whenever this particular topic comes up and I listen to some morons, it makes me so damned mad I can hardly see straight. Makes me so damned mad I can hardly talk. Because this is a topic that I feel real strong on. See, all of these lovers of humanity, all of these compassionate, good people, so concerned about little unborn Americans, are full of crap. While I was getting ready for work this morning, the television was on. There was a news story about Paul Simon. No, not the guy with the bow tie, the singer. And a benefit that he put on last night for something that he calls Big Blue. There are medical mobile units that go around to homeless shelters, giving medical care to the children of homeless women in New York City. They cost about $160,000 a piece. And drug-crazed rock and rollers are out there trying to raise some money for it because they care about people that are already alive and people that already have needs. In this markets all over the country, this time of the year, the Salvation Army is out there begging pennies for kids so that they can have shoes. Not unborn kids, not little unborn Americans, but real, live-born Americans. As we speak, Sister Margaret is in downtown St. Petersburg feeding children with government surplus food and food that was begged and borrowed because their parents can't take care of them and society refuses to. I am so sick to death of self-righteous morons trying to BS me about their compassion and their love for life. Hundreds of millions of people are suffering the most wretched lives right this very instant throughout the entire world, and nobody gives a damn about them. Oh, sure, we'll send them bullets to kill each other so that they can have free elections. What the hell about a free lunch, you know? They need a free lunch a hell of a lot more than they need a free election. What it boils down to is one thing and one thing alone: male ownership and control of women. And I am sick to death of it. I was leafing through Cal Thomas's book during the newscast and came across one of his articles talking about, the marvelous advances in technology. You can see the baby fighting the abortion. Oh, this is awful, and the pain, and no. Well, if Mr. Thomas and like-minded people want to see pain, let them go through any poor neighborhood and watch the pain. The for real pain. The unchallenged pain and misery of living in a world that doesn't want you because you're black, or because your eyes are slanted, or because your skin's yellow and you talk in a high, funny voice. If he wants to see real pain and misery, let him go through neighborhoods where children are abused regularly. Let him walk into virtually any urban school. He'll see real pain in their eyes. There's no love, there's no compassion for a human being. That has nothing to do with that whatsoever. It's control over the womb. Men refuse to part with it because they're terrified that women just might become their equals. They want to see pain, let them go into an unemployment office. Let them go into a welfare office and watch people beg for handouts to feed their families. Watch them go through the humiliation of trying to get food stamps. If he wants to go through pain or watch pain and humiliation and suffering, let him go out to a fast food restaurant and watch a 45-year-old man try to get a job up against a kid. He'll see lots of it. Has nothing whatsoever to do with little unborn Americans. Nothing whatsoever. All of this grand talk about these little unborn Americans, and, did you see Silent Scream where the baby is holding its hand up? Where's the talk about the 47-year-old woman that suddenly found herself pregnant 5 years after she thought she became infertile? Where's the talk about the 37-year-old lawyer whose birth control failed? Where's the talk about the 13-year-old girl who didn't know what in the hell she was doing? These ain't sluts we're talking about. These are real, live human beings whose very lives can be destroyed because of the uncaring compassion of the self-righteous. You ever been to an abortion clinic? I have. My first wife had one. I've told the story before, but for the benefit of those of you who didn't hear it, let me go through it again. She was 19 years old. She was married to a man who did not want children. And worse than that, she had been told by a number of very competent medical authorities that she would never have children. Ever. That her female parts simply did not work. They even went so far as to tell her not to use birth control. Because, again, her female parts were so delicate that it would probably do them wrong, do them harm. And wouldn't you know it, she became pregnant. Oh, the slut. The little 19-year-old slut had sex with her husband and became pregnant. And was terrified. She was terrified because, first of all, her husband didn't want children. She was terrified because she was afraid of her physical condition. If those parts weren't working so well down there, and just suddenly 1 month decided to work, she wasn't so sure they would come through with a full-term pregnancy and a healthy baby. And so together we went to an abortion clinic, a women's clinic in downtown Philadelphia, where she was so nervous, where she was so upset they could not perform an abortion on her, because it was going to require putting her out to do so, and they were not set up to do that. So the next day she had to go to a hospital. And we showed up early in the morning. And all the women were taken upstairs, and one of the requirements is that you had to have somebody with you the entire time. All the women were taken upstairs, and all of the husbands and boyfriends and mothers and sisters were put into a room. It was a great big room, about 20 by 20. It had maybe 24 chairs in it, all of them in a circle. And no one else but the people who were waiting for their daughters and wives and girlfriends to have abortions. And we sat there in stone silence for hours. No magazines, no television, just ashtrays and chairs in a circle. And one by one, the people started to talk. It was one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life. There was the mother who had the 12-year-old daughter upstairs. There was a young black man whose wife already had 4 children, who wasn't really quite sure how she was pregnant with the 5th. There was a 55-year-old man getting ready to retire, whose wife in her late 40s suddenly became pregnant long after they thought it was possible. I wish I could remember all of them. I can't. They're the ones that stick out in my memory. And nobody gives a damn about those people. About the best the other side can do is to make up stories about all of the adoring families out there ready to take in the adoptive children, which isn't true. It doesn't even mathematically add up. And all of the cute little phrases about unborn persons, when there are tens of millions of born persons in this country, hundreds of millions throughout the world, billions probably, whose quality of life just doesn't cut it. And they couldn't care less. They couldn't care less about them. The issue boils down to one thing and one thing alone: male dominance. I don't doubt for a moment that the vast majority of people who think that they are pro-life are sincere in their beliefs. But nor do I doubt for a moment that their leadership knows exactly what the score is. And the score has damned little to do with compassion or for love of life. Tom in Tampa, hi, you're on the air. Thanks for holding on.
Hell, I'm soiled, boy. I thought I had WPLP. Cheerio.
31 minutes that ass held on for that. 31 minutes. 31 minutes. Another one of the self-righteous morons. I'm thinking about it. Alan in Tampa, you're on the air at WFLA.
Yeah, Bob.
Yeah?
Could you answer a question for me, sir?
I don't know what's the question.
If an embryo or a fetus is not a human being, what is it? I'm a little confused. I don't understand.
Exactly what you just called it, an embryo or a fetus.
Well,
it's not a human being, is it, Alan?
Well, of course. What else can it be?
What it is, it's an embryo or a fetus.
If the embryo is not a human being, what is it?
Exactly what you call it. A potential, a growing, a seed. It's no more a human being than a kernel of corn is a corn plant.
Oh, but most assuredly the kernel of corn is a corn plant. What else can it be?
No, that's what it can become. It's not what it is.
Well, see, that's where we differ on this, you see. Because my...
No, where we differ on this, Alan, is that you still want to get involved in all of this supposedly intellectual conversation about what it is and what it might be. When it boils down to, Alan, is it's a woman. That's what it is. It's a woman with something inside of her. And that woman comes first.
That's something inside
That woman comes first, and that kills you, doesn't it, Alan?
Sir, could I please make one comment? If that something inside of her is can be nothing else than a human being, it has to be, because it's cause and effect. You know, you've got this effect. You've got this cause of a fertilized egg that has the effect of producing an...
You want to talk about cause and effect, Alan? Let's talk about cause and effect. Less than half of the kids that go to school in the state of Florida don't graduate from high school. You know why, Alan? Because they don't have proper homes. They don't have proper guidance. You don't give a damn about that, do you, Alan? You want to talk about cause and effect, Alan?
That's not the subject, though, is it?
Oh, yes, it is the subject, Alan. The subject is human beings. That's
right.
the subject, Alan. Human beings.
In this particular case, we're talking about human beings.
No. We're talking about what you would like to pretend is a human being, and you don't give a damn about real human beings.
If it's destined to become a human being, it must be human from the beginning.
No, it must not. And it is not necessarily destined, is it?
How can it be potential?
It is not destined to become a human being. If it was destiny, then you couldn't do anything to alter it, could you?
Well, if you can step into the process and...
Then I guess it wasn't destined.
Yes, it is destined from the moment...
Well, obviously not, if it can be interrupted.
Well, that we're differing on semantics there.
Your word, Alan.
Let me look at it... Let me try it from another way. If it is only potentially human, then I can plant a grain of wheat and have the potential of reaping pineapple. By using your own logic.
Am I supposed to be dazzled with this kind of logic?
No, of course not. I'm just presenting to you.
Then why are you presenting it?
Huh?
Then why are you presenting it?
Because that's
no, a grain of wheat is nothing but a grain of wheat. If you plant it and if all the conditions are just right, then it may become a stalk of wheat. But a grain of wheat is nothing but a grain of wheat. An embryo is nothing but an embryo.
A grain of wheat, it must become a wheat plant. And if it...
Oh, I beg your pardon. It can become a loaf of bread.
What, dead?
A loaf of bread.
But it first must become wheat.
Or it can become nothing more than a grain of wheat. It can sit there forever as a grain of wheat. Period.
If it is a grain of wheat, and if it is a grain of wheat, we're just assuming that it grows, okay? Because the fetus is already growing.
I see. You are not in the least bit interested in talking about the women whose lives are affected. You're not in the least bit interested in talking about the human beings who are alive, who are suffering.
Would you like my opinion very quickly on what abortion is?
Oh, go for it, Alan.
Just real quick. It is a typical modern American knee-jerk response to a bad situation brought about mostly by foolishness.
Yeah, right. Mostly by foolishness. Again, Alan, if anybody out there thought I had indicted you incorrectly, there is the proof positive brought about by foolishness, by a woman spreading her legs foolishly.
Well, I'll tell you why I call it foolish, okay? It's because with the inordinate amount of information being passed out about the reproductive process and the ease and availability of contraceptives for a woman to get pregnant out of anything other than choice is utter foolishness.
Yeah, right, Alan.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, you name me another reason.
I just did in a 20-minute monologue that you didn't listen to a word of because you don't care.
All that these Bible thumpers stand for. I'm just wondering why more of them aren't coming out here using the Bible as support for this pro-life thing.
I have no idea.
Try to beat the bushes a little bit, Bob. Get them out.
I'll take what I get. Thank you, Robin. This isn't a request line, nor is it... Let me take a second here, okay? I do a lot of shows just for the fun of it. This is not one of the fun issues. You know, if you're not entertained by the lack of the Bible thumpers, I genuinely apologize to you. And I know that you meant well, but there's just no way I can respond in a friendly manner, okay? George and...